Coming up, dare we say it, a Brooklyn Nets winning streak. I don't even know what that means. The Nets take care of the Wizards on their home floor behind another dominant performance from Kevin Durant. Kyrie Irving cleans it up on the back end, and we break down why a win like this can actually be a building block for the Nets going forward.
You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Brooklyn, yo. Yes, friends, it is the Locked On Nets podcast right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team, the Brooklyn Nets, every single day. Over there, you're going to find Doug Norrie, owner-operator of DFSR, for all your daily fantasy sports rankings from DraftKings to FanDuel. He's got you covered. I'm Adam Armbrecht and Adam Armbrecht breaking down the New York Football Giants on the One Giant podcast with my boy, Andy Mack. We thank you for making us your first listen of the day, free on all those great platforms. And Doug, as the Washington Wizards come up short at the hands of our Brooklyn Nets, 113-107, how did this game land for you? As no one needs to know, this is why Doug does our post-game nows for the network, because I could not get the words out of my mouth.
It's moments like that that make you think you're living in you're living with an alias and you just messed up your name. Like you're Alan.
I'm Bob Thompson. Adam Armbrecht.
Alan Ambrecht, and you've been living under a different name so far. No, yeah, really nice win by the Nets on the heels of us kind of talking about the Nets on a high level about this team. And, we learned that Ben Simmons is going to be out for the next few games. You do start to worry. Again, it's an undermanned squad once again, and they're facing a mostly full-strength Wizards team here. And it's just Kevin Durant again, man. Kyrie Irving, takes over parts of the third and fourth quarter. But, we have to start with Kevin Durant, 39 points, 13 of 20 shooting, 11 for 11 from the free throw line. Could not be stopped. The Wizards had no clue or answer for what to do with him on the offensive end. And when he is just going to be playing at this level, I do feel like we're running the same 4 podcasts in these post games, but it's good. He's on just an absolutely ridiculous heater right now. 39 against the Wizards, 45 against the Magic, 31 against the Trailblazers, 36 in the loss to the Pacers. It doesn't really get much better than that when you're on just an individual performance level here. And this is just kind of what you get with Kevin Durant, to the point where you're kind of like, yeah, 39. That's just what he does. They win. I hate to like kind of poo-poo it. I'm really not. It's just he's so freaking good that even when he goes to like kind of a little bit of a next level, you're like, yeah, it's Kevin Durant. That's what he does.
Yeah, not for nothing, too. Only 3 3-point attempts from him in this game, 5 in the last game. So he's doing it, as we said last episode, even old school basketball. He's working in the mid-range. He's always been a fan of that area of his game. But when you go 13 of 22 of the field, but effectively 11 of 17 from inside the arc, it's just using the full arsenal of his game. You said it does become, the sense of feels a little bit ho-hum, but I think this game and the way that he came out, we're going to talk about matchup a little bit later, some of the supporting cast a little bit later. It does feel like over this run, you highlighted even beyond that 45-point performance, that this is a nice recipe. And it may come across as, yeah, of course, Kevin Durant needs to score a lot of points. But I like the idea that Kevin Durant has come out aggressive to start these last few games, looking to get his shot, get his buckets. We've talked about before. Sometimes he can be a little passive, looking to rate the right basketball play, set up his teammates, get everybody else going. You know what? Sometimes the best path is having your best player start firing bullets early and often, and then worry about the rest later. And that's paid dividends, 3-game winning streak for Brooklyn.
Yeah, look, Washington didn't want to double them. It was going to be hard because they were playing with small lineups here, and they spaced the floor really well. That was what the Nets were going to have to do against this team with just the personnel that they had. But with so many spacers on there, even with some length, the Wizards just couldn't find it in themselves to try to just send doubles at him. And that's just death. Like Kyle Kuzma, Kristaps Porzingis, these guys are just not going to be able to hang with Durant when he's on this level, even with some of their length. They don't have the quickness. They don't have the defensive acumen. Especially Porzingis, who was just completely lost on a couple of switches on this. And when that's going to be the case, while you look at this Wizards team and you say, to some degree, they have names that you recognize, but no one is confusing these guys with high-level defenders. And if you're going to stick these guys out on an island against Durant, like this is what's just going to happen. And I mean, to some degree, Kyrie as well, because they just couldn't figure out that these are the two guys that are going to bury you if you allow them into one-on-one matchups. And that's just what Durant took advantage of all game. That's why this is why all the shots look easy. Like you said, getting into the mid-range, a lot of these shots look ridiculously easy because if he has a one-on-one matchup against just about anybody and you're not going to send help for him, this is the kind of efficiency you could expect from Durant. Like it's just, that's just what he can do. They don't have a defender that could really give him any kind of individual problems.
The one-legged baseline jumper, right? One of his patented shots, like that was just coming fast and furious for him with consistency. 11-11 at the free throw line too. Didn't get there last game, got there in this one as well. And then you mentioned Kyrie Irving, and I think again, since he's come back from his suspension, you go and look at the box scores, it's all there for you. But sometimes it's just felt like he's been there, but not necessarily having the high impact that you want a superstar player in the NBA to be having for you. In this game, though, while sometimes we talk about your turn, my turn, not necessarily being the way you want these two players to work, this wasn't really your turn, my turn. It was more like my half, your half, right? Kevin Durant, I think he goes through the break with 19. So he still does a lot more work in the second half of this game, but it felt like late third going into the fourth quarter, Kyrie Irving, to your point, all teams seem to be saying, hey, we'll live and die by the fact that these two players are capable of getting theirs, and we'll see if anybody else can get the job done. The problem for other teams, not us, is that then when Kyrie Irving turns it on late, go ahead. You had someone, you have to stop him. And he was able to get, again, attack at the basket. We always talk about how the fouls are never going to look the same, or free throw attempts won't look the same for him because he does a great job avoiding contact. But almost to your point about KD too, Kyrie Irving didn't really have to do a lot of attacking. He just kind of got to his spaces, found his shot, and got him to go down in rhythm, especially on the back end of this game, which kind of took off that pressure that we've seen for Kevin Durant of playing 38, 39 minutes a night. Sometimes you can get tired by the back end of it. This showed that balance as well.
Yeah, look, Kyrie was like, it's a kind of a quiet 27 points, all said and done. It was a lot of it came late. I think KD had 31 at the end of the third quarter, and then the key here was Kyrie and company were able to extend the lead with Durant on the bench. And when they're going to be able to do that, that is going to actually be the winning formula for the Nets, because if they bought him like 3 extra minutes on the bench when Kyrie was just fully in his bag at the end of the third, beginning of the fourth quarter, they were able, mostly at the beginning of the fourth quarter, like they were able to extend that lead. Kyrie, that's really when Kyrie put his stamp on the game. And that is critical for the Nets. Like they have to be able to do that because they're just so dependent on Durant at this point for just about everything that they do, that anything they can get when he's not on the court is really important. And at 2-3 minutes doesn't sound like a lot, but believe me, if that game had gone to like 4 points, he would have come in 2 minutes earlier and he would have been on track for like 39 minutes. Like they were able to get him. What did he end with in this game? 36. Yeah, 36, 37 minutes. That it sounds crazy to kind of make a big deal about that. But when we're living on the margins here with this team, it makes a difference. And that is what Kyrie needs to be able to do. And it was a really passive first kind of half for him. And it just was the total opposite in the second half. I got one quick stat. Kevin Durant right now, if I'm right here, because Luka and Curry don't play tonight, he has 60 more points. 63 more points than the next closest player in the NBA this season. Now he's played a few more games because some of these other guys have missed games, but still, I mean, like, just talk about, like, he's got 2 full really good games better than the next closest guy when it comes, and that's Luka, when it comes to scoring. And so if you're going to pile that on top of an efficient-ish second half from Kyrie Irving, the Nets are going to be a really hard team to beat.
Yeah, and as the pendulum swings, right, game to game, our opinion always is constantly evolving. Only problem I'm going to point out here, we're going to talk about the supporting cast and why this matchup worked for Brooklyn coming up here in a second. He was -1 though, plus minus. So there is a world. I'm not, they won by 6, but there is a world where maybe Jacques should have sat him down after 20 minutes. I don't know. Maybe he's sitting down at the half just to send him a message. We're not sure. Yeah. We can talk about that later.
That's why we only use a plus minus when it helps us. In this situation, it doesn't. No, yeah. I will say, we'll talk about our friends over at Bet Online here in a second. This game, just to go back to yesterday's podcast, these performances actually still do not change any of my opinion.
No.
If you go back and listen to like our state of the Nets from yesterday, this game is a nice win, and that's where I am with this team. My opinion of the team is unchanged about this. We'll talk about like a little bit why later when it comes to talking about who this opponent was and what the Washington was bringing. But I just wanted to clarify that about like it's great. I think I'm in a great mood about this. I'd much rather watch them win. These are super fun games to watch, but on a high level, I think I'm kind of unchanged. All right, going to talk Joe Harris here. Deserves a mention, of course. We're going to talk about what the Wizards were bringing on their end, what to expect going forward. First, going to tell you about our friends over at betonline.net, your number one source for sports betting info, stats, news, and analysis. I'm saying it right now. They don't have it up there right now because these things come down during the games. If Kevin Durant isn't in the top 3 of MVP voting and MVP odds over at BetOnline, I'm going to make a phone call. I'll make 2 phone calls and ask what is going on over at BetOnline. But I think they're going to do the right thing. Over at BetOnline, you can get the latest odds and trends for every professional and amateur league out there, from football to basketball to soccer to esports. They've got it all at betonline.net. If you love sports podcasts, you can find those at BetOnline as well. They're there with the fastest and easiest way to get in your betting fix. Head on over to learn what it's all about. BetOnline, where the game starts.
And of course, my friends, you made the Locked On Nets podcast your first listen. Why don't you go ahead and make your second listen Locked On Sports today? We always say that it's from, of course, the games that matter to the biggest stories in sports, going beyond the scoreboard and behind the scenes with local experts and insights that only Locked On Nets can provide. Locked On Nets, Locked On Sports today, they can provide that too. Guess what? Deshaun Watson is returning to the NFL for the Cleveland Browns against his former team, the Houston Texans. They've got you covered on that right now. You can go check out that episode. Locked On Sports Today, available on the Odyssey app, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcast needs fulfilled. And finally, Doug, we get to bring up Joe Harris's name in a positive light.
Hey.
The last few episodes we've talked about, I've mentioned how Jacques Vaughn has talked about Joe Harris, about how his teammates have talked about him. You saw Kevin Durant when he was on the bench and Joe Harris knocked down a corner. It wasn't this jubilant thing, but from a Kevin Durant, when he just gives you kind of that double fist, a little bit of a smirk, like this team, his teammates want him to be successful and want him to be knocking these down. It's critical for them, right? So he goes on an efficient clip here. Remember, last game, just 2 of 8 from beyond the arc. Only takes 6 attempts, from deep. Knocks down 4 of them. Knocks down a nice one late in conjunction with Kyrie Irving hitting a triple. Gives you 14 points, 5 of 10 overall. I want to go a little bit deeper on his game here, specifically when it comes to one larger matchup that he took on in this one. But all of the little things, the other supplemental stuff we've talked about with his game, we said it's looked a little bit better. You know, he penetrates a little better. His passing's been a little crisper. The rebounding, none of it matters unless you're doing this other thing that is your best thing, and that's hitting the 3. When you do that and knock down some triples, this is the Joe Harris that you think and need the Brooklyn Nets to have on the court.
He was 5 for his last 30 from 3 coming into this game. It was becoming an every shot kind of nail biting experience with him, where if you were anti Joe Harris, you were fully expecting it to miss. Now, I will say with anybody from 3-point land, you are going to miss more than you're going to make. So if you're rooting for a miss, you'll always be on the plus side of that, because no player hits more than 50% of their threes. But even for that, it had been a horrible stretch for him. It had looked really, really bad. The shots, even, some of them had been some close ones, but not all. Like, it had been a struggle. And it'd been to the point where if you were watching this game and you're feeling this on any level, you kind of did cringe every time, because you're just hoping, if you want Joe Harris to be good, and the Nets desperately need him to be good for them to really hit the next level of their sort of season, this was a really, really, really tough stretch. So when he gets the start for Simmons, the minutes are going to increase for sure. That with that, the opportunity is going to increase as well. And thankfully, it was a game that you can kind of rest your, like you can sort of rest and kind of breathe a sigh of relief for Harris. And I think to some degree, I'm sure he is doing that. I'm sure, like you said, the team is doing that as well. Jacques Vaughn talked about him pregame about like sort of what they needed for him. This is what they need from him for the Nets to be a relevant team. Like they're going to get the Kyrie and KD performances, but they desperately, desperately need this stuff to fall from the role players. It had been Yuta Watanabe. Royce O'Neal's hit a lot of threes this year. He and Harris and Curry seem to be trading, your turn, my turn in terms of games.
Yeah.
Like that seems to be the case. But Harris, again, you'd like to see this extend for a multiple game streak here. But if 37 minutes and solid shooting from behind the arc are signs that the legs are getting back for him fully, like these are really, really positive signs for him. And so I sit here a little bit waiting bated breath moving forward because it's been something of an experience with him this year. But you have to say this is probably his best game of the season, right? I mean, I know it was only 14 points, but I don't know. It just looked different to me tonight.
Oh yeah.
On both ends because he was able to hold up defensively as well.
So the two parts of it are Richard Jefferson, going back to a previous game had mentioned, I started really paying attention to it was, and you saw this when he was missing badly, especially early in the season, front rim. And that's always what you know for a basketball player is like your legs aren't underneath you. Like you're just not getting the lift when they're coming up short. So when you start to see him missing some long, especially in the corners, it's at least a progression in the right direction. And now it looks like maybe you have that payoff, you get the reward. And now, but again, now it's the next game. And if you go 1-9 in the next game, it's still going to put us right back in the same spot. But I did want to talk about, man, I know we're going to get a little bit deeper into this matchup and why it benefited, but I didn't necessarily look and think, man, when Porzingis gets on a switch on Joe Harris, this is where you thought bit of a problem here. No Ben Simmons in this game. Even Yuta Watanabe, it actually would kind of feel like one of his kind of matchup moments there potentially just with his size. Joe Harris was physical with Porzingis. I mean, I'm not considering call Porzingis soft, but I don't think of Joe Harris as being kind of, an enforcer for the Brooklyn Nets at any level. He was physical with them. He was pushing around with him, getting some shoves. He actually, foul call missed. He shoved him to the floor at one point in this game. But you needed that presence, especially when it came to the switches, because you could not try to work over those screens with consistency. You were going to have to just accept those results. And the fact that he held up as well as he did in that matchup really did matter on the defensive end.
Yeah, he got switched on the Beal a few times as well.
Yeah.
And those were not disasters. I mean, these have been train wreck scenarios for the Nets over the last few games, right? Like the Harris switch stuff, really just, other teams hunting out these guys. We'll get a little bit more into this with like the Wizards specifically and why they probably weren't all that equipped to take real advantage of the Nets' weaknesses, because this team still has significant weaknesses without Simmons on the court. Mm-hmm. But you can only play who you play here. And Harris in this situation was able to not be a negative, I don't think, at the defensive end in this game. And that is another great sign for just the overall, like I said, his legs, or like just the overall endurance, or whatever it is that you want to call his ability to stay on the court for long stretches and be effective, that had been starting to look really in question. I can't really understate this. It had been so bad for him these last few games that it was starting to feel like, I'm not like he would get benched, but you're kind of thinking, man, is it going to get when can we expect it to get better? I think that's probably the feeling I was starting to feel. And this one, at least for this game, does, I think, stem the tide on that a little bit. Like, okay, this is an NBA player. It's not going to be bad on both ends of the court. I mean, the turnovers for him are really bad. He's got like some of the highest turnover percentages for his minutes on the season. Like it had all been so bad. And you have to feel really good. Like if you're a Nets fan, even if like you're a Joe hater or Joe Harris hater, which there's a lot of Nets fans out there that do not like Joe Harris, you have to at least look at this game and be like, okay, good NBA minutes here.
Yeah, and the reality too being that you talk about, and we were saying about from this team construction and defensively and having to take on the guards. Again, whether or not it's the ideal matchup for Joe Harris, we know it's not. And this is the Patty Mills thing we talk about going back to last season. It's, hey, you're getting hunted because you're just the weakest link. But if you take that and then you're not giving the offensive production, there's just no offset here. And the last thing is
it's great. It's great.
Yeah. And you mentioned there just Curry. I know we're going to get into this matchup specifically, but I want to talk also about the rotations from Jacques Vaughn and something that maybe could be a bit of a trend here as well as we think about who's coming off the bench and when. But just as the reminder, because you highlighted Curry had gone 4 of 6 against the Pacers from deep, 7 of 10 against Portland. Then he follows it up 1 of 3, 0 of 1, 2 of 8 over these last 2 games, plays 48 minutes across those 2 performances, but just a complete shell of himself, right? Picked up 5 personal fouls in this one, looked a mess. And in the perfect world, as Joe Harris starts to get better, Seth Curry is also performing at a high level, so you have multiple options to go to. But at a minimum, it's good to see that if some guys are going to rise and fall here, Joe Harris was able to pick up that baton at least for tonight.
And when that happens for the Nets, they are going to blow out some teams. Like when these guys are both hitting from beyond the arc, this is going to be like a 20-point victory. And I think the Nets have shown what this win does show you is that I think the Nets they have that in them. I think there were times in this game where it looked like the Wizards were going to kind of claw back. There was some low basketball IQ stuff that happened, but that's fine. Like this was still a really, really nice win. Like this is a Wizards team, which we'll talk about here in a second, that the Nets have had the other thing that's happened for the Nets. They've had like an unbelievable run of good luck when it comes to who they play, like who has been able to sit out for the other team.
Yeah.
This team was not the case here with the Wizards. This was a full strength team. This is a nice win. This is a really nice one to put on the ledger. I want to talk about like what some of the things that really worked in the Nets' favor here in a second.
Okay, so obviously from a matchup standpoint, we want to talk to Washington Wizards specifically. But here's another funny thing about Joe Harris obviously getting dragged a bit here. Inside of this game as well, and this is over on certain social spectrums when you see certain guys come into the game. The thing that I saw from Jacques Vaughn leading into this game, he said trying to be consistent in what he's asking of his team and of his players. So it was Joe Harris. We don't have Ben Simmons tonight. We don't have Yuta. We know that. You're starting. So now the expectation has been set about what's needed of you. And then he said to the other players, hey, I'm going to need to come to someone here for 7 minutes, for 10 minutes, for 13, whatever it's going to look like. So be ready. And that's been a big shift, I think, since Vaughn has taken over, is just saying you need to be ready to play on a night-to-night basis. And while in contrast, maybe the sense was from players, we didn't know. When Steve Nash was coaching, we weren't sure if my name would never get called for 4 games, or I could end up playing 30 minutes randomly one night when maybe you're not locked in, and we could split the hairs about whether or not you always should be. Again tonight, I saw that Cam Thomas, man, you and I have always had our opinion of him. We think he's a nice young player that needs to develop in a lot of areas, but fans were ready to dump on him, and I get it. It wasn't a good game from him. He made a lot of bonehead plays. But I actually looked at it and thought, didn't start at all in the second half, got no minutes. Just like the game before, though, he got a little slice of the action. And I think that this is Jacques Vaughn saying, like, I need to still find ways, and right now I need minutes, to look to a guy and see if he can give me some consistency. This is a bad sample. Fine. But 13 minutes from Cam Thomas in some meaningful minutes, not garbage time. That's important to his development, and I think you're seeing Jacques Vaughn try to feather that line to bring him along and not just say, yeah, by the end of the year, you average 12 to 15 minutes in all of the most meaningless games that we had on our schedule.
I'm surprised to hear that about Cam. I guess I just didn't pick up on that. Like I thought that 19 minutes here, he scores 6 points. They do basically close with him. I thought it was a pretty solid performance from him, all things considered.
So did I.
I think that with him, you want to see, like, he's always going to have confidence. So that's very good. I actually don't worry from a confidence level at all about him. It's sometimes just that I just think that there's just certain things he can and can't do. And it's funny about that because in the first half, this was more Edmund Sumner minutes. And then they kind of went to Tom. They went to Cam later in like a 1-to-1, sort of like almost 1-to-1 switch on who they wanted to play those level minutes. I think one thing, and we'll go into the Wizards here in a second. I think one thing that helps them is there's like no obvious defensive issue with either of those guys. Like one of Cam's issues can sometimes be just defensively not really being able to hold up, but that wasn't really a case for what was happening against the Wizards here. Like they don't have tons of ways to exploit certain problems that the Nets have. The Nets went super small in this game. They were able to go really small, even against a sort of like bigger and longer team, because the Wizards don't have some specific things that can hurt you. And that specifically is why Cam, I think, was able to stay on the court. Like they don't have, well, I mean, we'll go ahead. Sorry, you're going to say something?
No. I was going to say at one point, I think they had a Kyrie Irving, Seth Curry, and Cam Thomas lineup running out there. And a lot of, I think a lot of the calls were like, hey, like, what is Jacques Vaughn doing? And shout out to Matt Brooks, Nets Daily in front of the show. He was like, do you think there's other options? Like, look at the bench. There's not other options here. Like, you have to go with what gives you a chance to keep your offense moving. And I think that's that idea of the second half. Hey, let's try to pull away. Let's try to bury them. We're looking at our best possible options and not really worrying about matchups. And that was something you could afford to do in a game like this against Washington.
And so this is where this really helped with the Nets, because they're obviously down a lot of personnel. Like they don't have Simmons, they don't have Yuta, they have almost no length. They have 3 total guys over 6'8" on the active roster.
Oh, sorry. By the way, real quick, not to cut you off. Yuta Watanabe is getting reevaluated next week now. He was targeted. He's supposed to come back on Friday. It's now gotten pushed to next week. So the old can't trust what comes out of Brooklyn Nets land. He's not coming back on Friday, and Warren is still big question mark. Go ahead.
Right. So they have no size. I think even Sharp might have been out with an illness, or David Duke. Sorry, I'm going to mess that up. I think they were both out. Either way, those guys weren't going to play anyway. The Nets are like crazy undersized here. It's only the only three guys that are above 6'8" are Markieff, Kevin Durant, and Claxton. That's it. That's the whole list of guys that are basically on the active roster that are in the rotation. Like Kessler Edwards is not in the rotation right now. But it was good news for the Nets here. And one of the reasons they were able to win is because two ways that other teams have absolutely killed the Nets this season are on the glass with just like an oversized athletic bigs that really, really pound them on the inside. The Wizards did not really bring any of that. And like really dynamic guard play that can pick out the Nets' worst point of attack defenders, which they really don't have any, except for like sort of Sumner. And the Wizards don't have that either. So while the Wizards are made up of like nice players, Beal, he's a good player. He's overpaid, but he's a good player. Like Staps, good player. Kuzma, good player. Like that's fine. And the Nets were able to hold up against that because the Wizards didn't really have great ways to exploit the things the Nets don't really do well. They're not going to crash the boards. The Nets didn't get completely crushed in second chance points and rebounds in this game. And the Monte Morrises of the world and Bradley Beal also to some degree can't pick out the worst defenders and then take them on one-on-one and just get guys into help situations where you can just get easy baskets at the rim. Like that is the stuff that's killed the Nets all season long. And the Wizards just don't have the ability to really do that. So this is another thing that really lined up for where the Nets just sort of personnel, even being undersized and sort of out talented after the top two guys, right? The Wizards just couldn't really take advantage of any of that stuff. And that really helped the Nets here.
Yeah, and it's funny coming into this one. I had noted that Porzingis, Beal, and Kuzma. You go to the Eastern Conference, the only other team with 3 20-point scorers on their roster is the Philadelphia 76ers right now, and they average all right around 20, 21, 22 points a night. They all exceeded it tonight. Like they all got theirs. But to your point, it's not the type of offense that you can go back to the well and really drill down on the Brooklyn Nets defensively and put them in a hole. It's always going to be there, and the shots are always going to come. And I was actually trying to pull up real quick where they are from beyond the arc on this season, because they were disastrous from there, and they were also terrible from the line, the Washington Wizards. So like there are these little kind of factors, I think, inside of it. When you look at it, you say, yes, they have these names. Yes, they're capable of scoring, but also they're not a team that necessarily can bury you, right? They're not a team that's going to get up by 5 or 7, and then you're going to turn around and be down by 13 or 15. And we've seen this. We've seen this against terrible teams that don't even have necessarily that collection of 3 top talents on their roster, has still given the Nets problems, but it's always been predicated on matchups and personnel, not necessarily just about whether or not you're capable of scoring with consistency.
Oh, for sure. Like this had been, just go back to these other games where they've really had trouble with some of these other like lesser teams, like even Indiana, right? Where it's like they have Halliburton and they have Miles Turner and guys like this, like specifically who maybe all sit in the sort of the same ranking range as some of these other guys in the Wizards. I mean, they're probably a little higher for a couple of them, but regardless, like those two guys can specifically really harm the Nets in a way that these other guys in the Wizards can't. So this, in terms of where this game fell on the timeline, it's a nice win. You really like this one. And the Nets finally get to play a team that is basically at full strength. It's around 500, right? I think the Wizards 500 this season. Yeah, they're 11. They dropped to 500 with this game, 11 and 11, a 500 team. But it's like, oh, nice. This is actually a team that's not going to be able to really crush Brooklyn with the things that they don't do well. And I think we're going to still see some of the same recurring themes with this team going forward, because other teams are just going to have just different makeups of the team. But in this one, we get a wing heavy team that's like not all that physical. Great. That's what the Nets need to face. I would love for the Nets to face like sort of non-physical teams like this that don't have creators that can pick out, switches along the perimeter and really dust them, because the Wizards aren't going to be able to do that. And I think the Nets, for like this kind of challenge, like this is let's play the Wizards every single night. It's a really good matchup for Brooklyn.
Yeah, and the last notes from this game are, because I just pulled it up, 19th the Wizards are at the free throw line, also 19th from beyond the arc. So that kind of plays itself out here. They're actually disastrous and far worse than their season average from both of those fronts. The other thing coming into this game that I had highlighted was the Brooklyn Nets were leading the NBA in field goal percentage, but their attempts are near the bottom. They're actually really good from beyond the arc, but again, not enough attempts. And this one, they knocked it down with consistency, which was a good thing. 24 of 26 at the line as well, to go along with 11 from 26 from beyond the arc. It's like the Nets play, and we talked about pace of play these last handful of seasons too. And sometimes the personnel dictates that a little bit. And I think they're a different looking team this year, and especially without Simmons in the lineup than they have been in years past. But they're doing certain things well. It's just that the volume either needs to increase or the consistency needs to increase. This was a good win. You said it earlier. Doesn't change my opinion on the team overall, the season overall, but I'd much rather see them beat the Wizards than come out of this game losing by 7 to 10 points and continuing to feel like this thing is just going in the wrong direction. 3 wins in a row, and you're in the middle of a homestand, which is a great thing for them.
Yeah, 4 of the last 5. They have a tough little stretch coming up here. Toronto on Friday, Boston on Sunday. The Boston game will be particularly tough. That's a really, really good team this season. But then you get Charlotte, Atlanta. Atlanta's okay. And then Indiana, Washington again. Like, the Nets have a chance here to pile on some wins. Like, they need to take this part of the schedule and really rack up some W's. Like, build out a little bit. Like, just build out a little bit of a cushion here, because a point differential is still in their favor. You know, they've lost a couple games here and there that probably could have gone their way. For the most part, like, the games have been pretty well decided for the Nets. But this is the part of the schedule now where they have to get like 4 games over 500 or something like that. Like, that's where you really want to see it, because there's going to be a time here where Katie just is not going to play 38 minutes a night every single night for the rest of the season. Like, they just don't. That's just not going to happen.
And get yourself up in there. They're 8th right now in the Eastern Conference, 12 and 11. But right there is Toronto. They're going to play them Friday night. Atlanta, Philadelphia, even the Pacers, you think 12 and 8 going to come down to earth. Like, you can be right there in the 6th, 5th seed and give yourself that little bit of cushion, because knock on wood, Kevin Durant may not always be there to give you 39
minutes every single game. Like, I'm not even saying he's going to get injured. He's just not going to play. Like, they just can't do that. Like, he's already played. The reason, as I said before, that he's so far up on just raw points on the season is because he's played a million minutes and he's played every game. It's like he doesn't lead the league in points per game, right? He's going to actually get a little higher up there now. But regardless, like, he has a lot more points because he's played a few more games than everybody else. And that's just not going to stand for the whole season, because no one would ever expect him to play 82. But the times where he's playing like this, you have to you have to bank every win when he's playing like this. Like, you just can't lose any of these games. And that's what you take away from this game. Yeah. Really nice win. Get over 500, for the season here. And that's what you want to see. We'll be back again tomorrow talking. We'll take another back look at just this game and some of the other roster issues that they're having right now, because there's some injury stuff here. Like, we'll go into the Utah stuff. We'll go into Simmons, like what this means, what to expect from TJ Warren, who's going to be coming back here sooner than later. And they might need him more than they think too. So there's a lot of stuff to evaluate with this Nets roster. In the meantime, make sure you subscribe over on YouTube. Still have a ton of people over here in YouTube Live. Really appreciate the chat. Is an absolute flamethrower in here. Make sure that you are over there checking that out. We're live after almost every game, but you need to be subscribed to the Locked On Nets YouTube so you know when it's happening. Very easy button to click, and it's all super free, and that's the number one way to help the podcast. Subscribe over to Locked On Nets YouTube.
4K is on its way, friends. Help us get there over on YouTube. We love benchmarks like that. Love numbers. Doug's a big fan. The brave may not live forever, but the cautious do not live at all. An unknown quote? No. It's from the Prince of Geneva, from the Princess Diaries.
Didn't see that one coming. Yeah, one of the all-time great poets, not one of the all-time great American poets, but just one of the all-time great poets. We will be back again tomorrow talking more Brooklyn Nets basketball.
It's the Post Podcast. How are you? How's it going? How you living, man? I got to be honest with you. It's not even a joke. As we welcome everybody in on the YouTube side of things, throw in the Locked On Nets if you have a question, comment. It has. I see them stacking up, the number of comments when we're doing these lives. So obviously people have been in on it. But just peek behind the podcast curtain. I said it during it. We do our little post game wrap ups that the network uses to promote our show and cover the NBA. I did no less than 7 recordings because I could not get through the words Kevin Durant, couldn't get through the word Brooklyn Nets. I could not get across it. So it was no surprise at all to me that I could not pronounce my own name in the intro.
Yeah, it threw me off too, but that's why we forge ahead because we're professionals.
That's right.
Yeah, no, I don't know how long we're going to be doing this YouTube live here for. We have a few other commitments that we have to get in here post game, just on the network side. So we'll stay in here for a little bit. Really appreciate all the nice words that have kind of come over here over the last. I try to read as many of these comments as we're talking. It's a double lift, but believe me, I'm reading almost everything, even as I'm talking during these things. Even the called fake fans. We got the obvious ones that come in that needing the stretch five. Got the obligatory Boogie Cousins mention, the obligatory Mo Bamba mention, like all these things that are the tried and true over on the YouTube comments.
The tent poles that are the YouTube comments.
Yeah, much appreciated on that's everyone that's come in here. I don't have any like ton of other thoughts about this win. I thought it was a really nice win. I thought that this was a game you have to win. Like when you have Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving on your team against this Washington Wizards team, like this is the expectation.
Yeah,
I think that like it's hard to like get up out of your chair and cheer too much, I think, for the W, except that I will say I know I'm happy with the win. I would have been very bummed if they had lost. Like this is the game. And I think maybe that's just my expectation level on where these wins need to fall. This would have been really tough. I really never thought that they were in too much danger of that happening. Like I thought this was a kind of an easy one, all things considered. But I know like where my expectation level is with the team. Like this had to be a win. Like there was really no excuse.
It's so funny too, because I know it looked different. They've had different players there in Washington. But the theme of Bradley Beal's Washington Wizards is like they're not generally that good of a team. They never quite get there. They're never really a concern when it comes around playoffs or playing game kind of conversations. And if you're putting it in the prism of we have Kevin Durant, we have Kyrie Irving, and at some level of expectations that even if we've reduced it, this is supposed to be a win. Like to your point, this is supposed to be a win. When I think about the Toronto Raptors, if they were 100% healthy coming up on Friday night, I have concerns. There's matchup problems. There's young talent. There's ascending talent. The guys that Washington has are primarily guys you kind of all know who they are. They fit into a certain form, and they're a very beatable team. So, yeah, if they had lost this game, it would have been easier to kind of troll it a little bit. I'm glad that you throw this one up here from Hector, because we'll hit a couple of these questions here. And he says, the approach that Jacque Vaughn is bringing is very much needed. The Nets seem like they're starting from square one, which is good. Yeah, I mean, listen, they're 8-4 now under Jacque Vaughn. I'm noting, too, they're 7-4 at home. It's always good to have that home winning record as well. It'd be feeling like there is some comfort there playing at the Barclays Center. Yeah, I don't have anything negative to say about Jacque Vaughn and what he's doing. From the last couple episodes, Doug, it's mostly like we're saying, like, we just don't know if this team is good enough to maximize what their ceiling would be potentially.
Well, I think like this game was I think this game was like the expectation level for this level of talented team. Like, I think this was like this team that they brought in here, no Simmons. I mean, I can't believe no Yuta, guys like this, like that become important. Like this is the expectation, like just like win a nice game. A couple of things that I like that Jacque does. Well, one, he gives a mean interview. I mean, like he's like really good. He gets into these pregame interviews. It's like he would talk at those podium all day long. Even if you get onto the national games where he's had those TNT on the court, and I mean the eye contact, absolutely A+. Just he's staring daggers through these folks. Also, I love the quick hook timeout when things aren't going well. Like that's
he took one 30 seconds, I think, into the start of the second half.
I think he just wants to do it. I think he wants the team to have a defensive blunder within the first like 45 seconds, just so he can whip out the tee and bring him back to the bench, because he's done that. I mean, every game for the last 4 had like a quick. Maybe I'm overthinking that, but he
has at least like one quick timeout every single game. And he also has what you consider like, it's not a quick trigger, but it's like when a run is seemingly possibly going to start, he doesn't even want to know if they're going to go on a 7 or 8 point run. For the most part, he's like, I just saw a 4-0 run, 7-0 run. That's more than enough. Not getting to double digits, not going to play this thing out. I'm going to come back. And again, he whips that chair out, gets himself sat down. He clearly has something. Every time he uses one of those, it's not just for the sake of like pausing the other team. It's specifically to go over something with the players that are on the court. And that matters.
And I don't feel like we got that a ton from Nash. Nash was never
you
really
didn't like
heavy.
The timeout when like he would call the timeout and kind of stroll out onto the court while everyone got back to the bench. And
just like, I don't know if I just want to see that more. I think Nash really wasn't very good with that either. Like he never at times did not have a sense of like sort of flow of the game. It didn't feel like I don't know if he ever got fully on board with enough reps to like really have a good idea of what was going to happen there. That could be just practice. I mean, Jacque Vaughn spent a lot of time on benches now, like a lot. He's got so many hours. He's been a head coach before, back to an assistant, back to a head coach. The ego's gone for this guy.
Even to know what doesn't, you get to watch what doesn't work well, right? Like you get to learn what's bad as much as anything that works.
And sometimes I think like that flow of the game stuff is just kind of reps. Like there's no way to recreate. You cannot recreate it in a practice. You can't know, like you're never been in charge of strolling the sidelines and just knowing when the buck stops with you about when to stop some of that stuff, unless you just do it a ton. And I think that like those are little things that Vaughn seems to have that Nash clearly did not have. Like he just didn't have that. I think there was a lot of times where he just did not understand like the flow of the game, and assistant coaches aren't really going to be able to help you too much with that.
Just a shout out to Wesley. I saw you in the comments there. As we get closer to the deadline and stuff, we will highlight. I like framing it that way better than throwing out some of the names like Boogie Cousins and Mo Bamba. Reasonable trades that the Nets could try to target to improve the team. We'll talk about that, but it's still at the point now where you want to get back some of these other players.
I don't think there's like any
Warren has before you think about what you know. We know there's certain things they need, but you don't know where everybody else stands yet and the targets you can go after.
And this isn't like dismissing it, but I do think in a lot of ways it's kind of not pointless, but it's so far from now till then that there's just too many things that can happen. And you're just not making trades right now. Like other teams aren't interested in doing it. Like there's a reason trades don't happen right now. Like this is like the part of the season where you settle in and see what you have. That's what the NBA is doing right now. Most teams are settling in and seeing what they have. There will be a flurry of trades later, but the landscape of the NBA will change dramatically. It's a good chance the landscape for the Nets will change dramatically before then. So this is why speculating on some of these trades, I just don't think it just doesn't pay to do it because they just don't happen right now. The trades just simply don't happen right now. So speculating on them is a complete fool's errand because you just would never do it. Like it's too far away to the end of the season to know exactly what your trajectory is. And so it's not like we avoid the trade talk. It's just that like there's a one specific window where it's really important. And I think there's other windows where it's just not that realistic to discuss.
And the other thing to me is too, just on that, because I was thinking about this, because I started looking at like some other non names that everyone says, and I was mostly actually looking at like the backcourt and thinking about defensive players, right? Guys that can help in that area, and free agents. Not talking about trades, just guys that are out there and available, veteran players. I wish desperately that DeAndre Bembry hadn't suffered that injury that he did at the end of last year and got waived by the Bucks, because ironically, a 6'6" kind of guard would be the guy you'd want to bring back. But the idea that you would think, in theory, the players you have on this roster, the DDJs of the world, and you mentioned before, Daron Sharp was out, I think, due to illness in this game. But like those kind of guys, like if anything, you're going to look at the guys you have in your system first. And that's actually as much of a reason not to worry about the trades or the speculation or who they could bring in. Because first thing you're going to do is exhaust every possible option that you think you've successfully added to this organization. And somebody had asked me over on YouTube on a previous one, about going back and like evaluating kind of Sean Marks and the moves we've made. And we thought it at broad strokes, but I thought it might be more interesting to drill down on a little bit deeper. But that's what's going to come into question here. The DDJs of the world, the Alondes Williams that's down in the G League, like all these other guys that we've talked about and heard about, and Kessler Edwards, like, are they all totally washed? Are they all totally useless to what you can accomplish this year? Probably. And they don't matter in the hierarchy, as Doug will say. It's only a 7 or 8 man rotation for the most part anyway. But that's also why it doesn't matter to the trades, the free agents right now in this moment. We did the quarter season at 22 games, at 45 games. That's when it'll start to matter more, because all these teams are going to confirm or deny what they are.
Yeah, like, and I already know too, there's just going to be guys that you would not think would be available now that are going to be available in trades.
Yeah, and that's a big factor too. Yeah.
They just because you can just already see some of these teams, like the Bulls. The Bulls might have a fire sale here. Like I don't think we know it now, but they're 9-11. I don't think I see like a ton of ways that they're going to really, really improve over the rest of the season. They might just call it, right? Like,
and yes,
I'm not necessarily saying that's going to
Vucevic off your hands for a discount price.
I don't think I would. But then maybe I just think he can't play in the playoffs. These guys are so hard in the playoffs. This is the hardest part is like determining what you actually is going to help you get to a championship, not to like get to the playoffs and win a series, like win a championship. Sorry, go ahead.
It's one of the funny things too. Like, and not that it's not all things aren't created equal in this sense. Cause actually there's a specific player on the Chicago Bulls that I think the Nets would be good if they add him to the roster. But when you go and look at teams, it's not
Alex Caruso.
What?
Alex Caruso.
Yeah, well, yes, I would.
He'd be the
like
perfect
to.
guy. He'd be like, I'm telling you right now, that guy. Forget Vooch.
Well, I was hiding the name until later, Doug, but you blew it. Yes,
is that really
Caruso would be the exact perfect. He's a perfect guy.
Yeah.
Gritty, defensive-minded guard, veteran player, understands what his role is. Great facilitator. Oh, he's perfect. He's the perfect player.
Buddy, I didn't mean to steal your thunder on that one.
Thanks for nothing. But
all right, we gotta get out of here.
We'll get out of here. Was just that it's not universal. Like, okay, the Lakers are bad. Doesn't mean LeBron James is bad. But it's always comical when you start thinking about picking the carcass of a roster that's having a bad year. You're like, well, what is that roster? What are these players, even individually? And a guy, like you said, like Vucevic, hey, okay, yes, there's value there. But if you're the Nets or any team that thinks we're adding to then build towards the playoffs and a playoff run, it needs to be playoff value. And that's where a guy like, again, I'll just go back to Caruso, right? It's like, that's the guy that has real playoff value for a roster and desperately fills a need.
Yeah, like not saying that's going to happen, but like I think it's time to start thinking like a little out of the box with this team. But there are going to be other teams as we get later in the season that are just going to, they're just not going to get there. Right?
I'm making a list, and checking it twice, and it's filled with players I want the Nets to go after down the road.
Well, I came up with Alex Caruso all by myself, so maybe you'll have someone good next time. So that one was all me. That's 1+1 for me. All right, we got to get out of here. Really appreciate everyone that jumped into the live here. Try to stay a few extra minutes. Like I said, we do have some other obligations that we need to hit before the hour gets into the witching hour. We really appreciate it. We will be back again tomorrow talking more Brooklyn Nets basketball.